Imagine, for a moment, that you've just awakened. Not in your own soft bed, but in a narrow wooden room several stories above the clamoring streets of Rome. It is still early, not yet light, but already the city stirs beneath you. The faint crack of wagon wheels on stone, the barking of a dog 2 streets over, and the groaning of wooden beams all begin to weave into the soundscape of your morning. You live in an insula, a Roman apartment block, not the kind of villa that poets describe, filled with marble busts and mosaic floors. No, this is a tenement built tall, narrow, and fast. Your room is small, perhaps 8 feet by 10, though there are no windows to measure the light. The air inside is dense and slightly sour, a mixture of yesterday's lentil stew, lamp smoke, and something less pleasant that drifts up from the latrine channels below. The walls are thin. You can hear the couple next door arguing in whispers, and on the other side, the telltale rasp of someone snoring heavily. There is no private space here. The floors creak. They always creak, especially yours. Up here on the 5th floor, you're lucky to have this room at all. Many sleep in shared spaces or curled in corners beneath stairwells. But here, at least, you can claim a spot of your own, however temporary. You roll up your thin blanket and place it on the shelf. It is woven from rough wool and smells faintly of dust. You fold your tunic carefully, though the fabric is already worn thin and stained from last week's labor. You wash with a cloth dipped in a bowl of water fetched from the communal cistern. Water that is neither warm nor especially clean, but it will do. There is no glass on the window, just wooden shutters. You crack them open to let in the first light and the first scent of the day. Smoke from the bakery below. The sour tang of the tanners across the alley. Faint traces of olives and sweat and ash. Rome has many smells, few of them gentle. You dress quickly. There is no time to dawdle. You must leave before the crowd clogs the stairs. The stairwell is narrow and dark, winding like a snake down toward the street. The walls are slick with age, and the wood underfoot feels soft in places where water and time have worn it thin. You step carefully. Too many have fallen here in the half-light, rushing to work or to market. Outside, the alley is alive. Vendors shout, children run barefoot, a woman carries 2 clay jugs and mutters curses in Greek under her breath. Somewhere nearby, a man tunes a lyre with deliberate slowness, not for performance, but because it's the only moment of peace he'll get today. You head to work, perhaps in a bakery, or the dye workshops near the Tiber, or maybe hauling amphorae in the warehouse of a merchant who never learns your name. The pay is meager, just enough for stale bread, a splash of watered wine, and your monthly rent, paid to a landlord who never fixes the roof, but always remembers when payment is due. As you move through the streets, you pass others like you, workers, slaves, freedmen, the quiet bones of the empire. You avoid the patricians and equestrians, whose togas sweep the dust as they are carried in litters. You stay out of the way. You are not invisible, but you are unimportant. By midday, the sun is high, and the heat radiates off the stone walls. Your tunic clings to your skin. Sweat gathers behind your knees, under your arms, and at the nape of your neck. There is no shade in this part of the city. You duck into a shaded portico to eat a crust of bread and a fig that is already soft. Later, you return to the insula. The stairs are more difficult now. Your muscles ache. Your legs protest. But up you go. 5 flights. 6, if you count the step where the last one collapsed and no one replaced it. Your neighbor is cooking something in a small clay pot over a flickering oil lamp. The scent of boiled cabbage lingers in the hallway like an accusation. Your room is hot. The shutters are open, but no breeze comes. You sit on your small stool and let your eyes close for a moment. You can hear the city beyond. A hammer striking metal in the blacksmith's yard. Laughter from the tavern below. The sudden screech of a hawk overhead. There is no bathhouse nearby. You would have to walk too far, and the fee, though small, is too much today. You will wipe yourself down again. Olive oil is for the rich. You have water and a cloth. Evening comes slowly. The walls of the insula hold heat like an oven. The smell of the latrine rises stronger as the sun lowers. The drains have not been cleared. You light a small lamp, oil with a cracked wick. It sputters once, then settles. You eat a small bowl of porridge. You chew slowly. You say nothing. There is no one to talk to here. As the city darkens, you lie down once more. You listen. The insula always speaks. Wood creaks. Rats scratch in the walls. Somewhere below, 2 men argue in slurred Latin. Then a crash. Then laughter. You think, briefly, of what it might be like to live in a domus, a proper home, with mosaics, with water that runs clean, with space, with silence. But then the thought passes. You are tired, and the floor beneath you is warm. The fire risk is always there. The walls are old. The beams are dry. The stairs are narrow. You know that if a fire starts below, it will reach you in minutes, but you sleep anyway, because you must, and tomorrow it begins again. Life in a Roman insula is not about catastrophe or drama. It is about the quiet, pressing discomfort of survival every day, and you, like so many others, endure it. But would you last a day? Most wouldn't. Night in Rome was never truly dark, even before the invention of gaslight or electricity. The eternal city flickered with life. Oil lamps in doorways, the soft glow from taverns, the light of distant torches carried down alleyways. And in July of 64 CE, that glow became something else entirely. It began, we are told, in the shops near the Circus Maximus. Perhaps it was a spark from a brazier or a torch set down too close to a curtain. Perhaps it was negligence. Perhaps it was sabotage. Perhaps it was simply heat, wind, and chance. No one can say for sure. But what followed was not a fire. It was the fire, the one that would burn through the soul of the Roman Empire, leaving behind not just ash and ruin, but suspicion, slander, and the reshaping of history itself. The Great Fire of Rome. It burned for 9 days, and the city was not built to resist it. The insulae, the apartment blocks where thousands lived, were particularly vulnerable. Built of timber frames and plaster walls, they were often crammed together in twisting neighborhoods, with alleys just wide enough for a mule to squeeze through. Once the flames reached these tenements, the destruction was inevitable. They ignited like kindling. Wind carried embers from roof to roof. Stairwells became chimneys. Families fled, often barefoot, carrying only what they could. Some tried to douse flames with amphorae of water. Others formed chains from cisterns, but it was never enough. The fire moved too quickly. Even stone buildings collapsed. The intense heat cracked masonry, melted bronze, and consumed support beams. Temples, warehouses, markets, all were lost. By the end of it, 3 of Rome's 14 districts were completely destroyed. 7 more were severely damaged. Only 4 escaped with minimal harm. Among the ruins, silence settled, a kind of heavy, breathless quiet that often follows catastrophe. Ash floated in the air like snow. The Tiber ran gray with runoff. People wandered, stunned, looking for lost relatives, for food, for shelter. Some stared at the smoking rubble of buildings they'd been born in. Others simply sat, dust-covered, in the streets. And in the midst of this, in the very center of it, stood the Emperor, Nero. His role in the fire has been debated for nearly 2,000 years. The popular story, one that has passed through the lips of countless generations, says he watched as the city burned, that he played his lyre, composing verses while flames devoured the slums. But this image, compelling as it is, may not be fair. Nero was not in Rome when the fire began. He was in Antium, a coastal town. When news reached him, he returned immediately, or so contemporary sources claim. He organized relief efforts. He opened the Field of Mars and his own private gardens to refugees. He arranged for food to be delivered at reduced prices. But the suspicion lingered, because in the ashes of the old city, Nero saw possibility, and he began to build. He envisioned a new Rome, wider streets, lower buildings, more fireproof materials. He planned to impose a city grid, more rational and orderly. For many, these ambitions were welcome. But what truly drew criticism was the Domus Aurea, the Golden House. This sprawling, opulent palace complex stretched across land cleared by the fire. It included artificial lakes, vast gardens, and a colossal statue of Nero himself. For the Roman people, many still homeless, this display of personal grandeur amid public ruin was difficult to stomach. And so, Nero needed someone to blame. He turned his gaze toward a small, strange sect growing quietly in Rome, the Christians. At the time, they were still obscure, often confused with Jews, seen as secretive, and viewed with suspicion for their private rites and refusal to honor Roman gods. Nero accused them of arson. The punishment was severe. Executions were public, brutal, and theatrical. Some crucified, others burned at night to serve as torches in Nero's gardens. The historian Tacitus, writing some decades later, recorded that even those who disliked the Christians were unsettled by the cruelty. But the damage was done. The narrative had shifted. Nero, once suspected of orchestrating the fire, had found a scapegoat. Yet even with blame deflected, his reputation never fully recovered. In time, the fire would become a symbol, not just of destruction, but of imperial vanity, of urban vulnerability, and of how thin the line between order and chaos truly was in the Roman world. The insulae that burned were rebuilt, stronger this time, with more brick and less wood. The streets were widened. Fire regulations were introduced, even a new corps of watchmen. But the memory of that smoke, the helplessness of wooden beams collapsing in the night, remained. For the poor of Rome, especially those living in insulae, the fire was not politics. It was personal. It was the loss of everything: a bowl, a blanket, a child, a neighbor, a familiar stairwell, a way of life. And when the ashes cooled, they simply moved into another insula, built fast, built tall, built cheap, because in Rome, life always continued, even when everything else had burned. Beneath the bustling surface of modern Rome, under the paved streets, gelato shops, and traffic lights, lies another Rome, quieter, darker, and still whispering. It is a city of shadows and stone, of collapsed staircases and soot-stained ceilings. A city buried not by time alone, but by the weight of progress. For centuries, the old city was never cleared away. It was simply built upon. Again and again, earth accumulated. Debris was compacted. Buildings fell or were dismantled, and new ones rose on their remains. And so, Rome became a layer cake of centuries, a vertical memory. And within those lower layers, sometimes 10, 20, even 40 feet beneath the ground, lie the remnants of the insulae, the tenement blocks, the homes of the invisible millions. When archaeologists began peeling back the layers of modern Rome, they did not find intact structures with clean mosaics and proud columns. They found fragments, partial walls, burned floorboards, shards of amphora used to store wine or olive oil, charcoal lines marking the edges of long-forgotten fires. One of the most remarkable sites lies near the Basilica di San Clemente, a modest church not far from the Colosseum. Beneath the current basilica, which dates to the 12th century, there is an older one from the 4th century, and beneath that, a Roman street. There, archaeologists discovered a multi-room insula complex, dim, damp, and wonderfully preserved. You can walk through narrow corridors that once carried the footsteps of bakers, fishmongers, and scribes. You can see soot marks near what may have been cooking stations. A fragment of a staircase spirals upward and ends in rubble. There are other places, too, parts of the Crypto Balbi, where archaeologists have traced the transformation of a city block from the late Republic through the Empire into the medieval period. Here, traces of insulae appear as thin foundations, carefully placed bricks, and the unmistakable repetition of function. Repeated layouts for repeated lives. One of the most curious finds came not in the grandeur of central Rome, but beneath its outer districts. In Ostia Antica, Rome's ancient port city. Here, entire insulated blocks remain, remarkably well preserved. You can walk through them. They rise 2 or 3 stories, rare, since most Roman buildings have long since crumbled. The brickwork is simple, the rooms small. Shared latrines exist at the ends of corridors, and water tanks sit in courtyards that once collected rain. You can still see, in places, the grooves in the door frames where wooden shutters once slid open. Some rooms have remnants of plaster still clinging to the walls, painted in faded reds and yellows, long dulled by time. Perhaps there were once frescoes, or prayers, or curses. One floor contains a bakery with round basalt millstones still in place. These massive wheels were turned by donkeys or slaves to grind grain. Adjacent to them, ovens blackened and cracked, as if still warm from a long-forgotten fire. And nearby, a small sign carved in stone, Panem et Circenses, bread and games. A familiar phrase, but perhaps here just a literal reminder of daily life. More intimate than architecture are the everyday items. Archaeologists find combs, bone needles, dice made of ivory, lamp fragments, sometimes with images. A gladiator here, a fish there. There are graffiti, too, scratched into plaster or etched into brick. Some are names, others are jokes. One reads, "I was here with Livia. She stole my money." Another simply says, "Beware the stairs. They bite." These voices are faint, but they're unmistakably human. And when we descend into these layers, into the literal underworld of ancient Rome, we learn not from the marble, but from the mud. The greatest mystery, perhaps, is how many of these structures we've still never uncovered. Most of ancient Rome remains hidden beneath office buildings, beneath streets, beneath churches whose foundations sink into old walls with names long forgotten. And yet, even in their silence, the insulae endure. They remind us that empires are not built by emperors alone, but by those who live 6 stories up in a room no wider than a cart, who rise before dawn, who carry water, who leave behind little more than a clay cup and a name scratched into brick. Their stories aren't loud, but they are everywhere beneath our feet. Let us now ascend, not just physically, but socially. Leave behind the dust of the alleyway, the fire-prone timber of the insula, the flicker of oil lamps shared between neighbors. Instead, walk slowly through an open atrium where sunlight filters through a rectangular skylight. Step over cool mosaic tiles. Inhale the faint perfume of lilies placed in a bronze dish. You are in a domus, a Roman townhouse, and not just any home, but one belonging to a senator. But tonight, our focus is not on the senator himself, not on politics, power, or the Senate steps. Tonight, we follow the quiet, poised rhythm of his wife, a matron of noble birth, educated, respected, and expected to be both ornament and operator of the household. She awakens not to a chorus of neighbors or creaking beams, but to the quiet scrape of a servant opening the wooden shutters. Soft light enters the room. The walls are painted in frescoes, perhaps a scene of a mythological marriage or a pastoral garden. The bed is draped in fine linen. A small ivory comb rests nearby, placed precisely where it always is. Her day begins in silence. 2 slaves assist her with bathing, warm water drawn from the cisterns, heated in bronze kettles. The air is scented faintly with rose oil and ground bay leaves. She bathes with deliberation, not for pleasure, not entirely, but for order, for dignity, for preparation. Afterward, she dresses in layered tunics, bound with a sash of carefully embroidered wool. Her stola, the traditional garment of a Roman matron, falls to the floor, and over it a palla is draped. Each fold speaks of wealth, but more importantly, of control. Sloppiness is not permitted. Jewelry is minimal but deliberate. Gold earrings, perhaps a family heirloom, a brooch set with onyx, a signet ring that speaks not of her name, but of her lineage. Then her hair, styled in careful waves, perhaps held by pins carved of bone or polished bronze. Hairdressing is not merely a routine, but a ritual. To the outsider, it may seem vain, but to her it is armor, a message, a duty. Her first task is to oversee the familia, not her family, but the household. Dozens of slaves, cooks, attendants, tutors, and stewards. She checks the ledgers. She approves the menu. She reviews the delivery of textiles and the quality of figs from the orchard near Ostia. She speaks in low tones, measured and clear. She rarely raises her voice. She does not need to. The power she holds is silent but absolute. Later in the morning, she may host a small gathering, a literary salon perhaps. A poet recites verses beneath the columns of the peristyle garden. The women sip watered wine, discuss Ovid's latest satire, and offer observations with soft smiles and sharp eyes. These gatherings are not frivolous. They are networking, disguised as leisure. At midday, the household quiets. The senator returns, briefly, escorted by a secretary. He eats quickly, in silence. She does not press him. She knows the rhythms of his moods. he departs again, and she resumes her role. Part curator, part diplomat, part priestess of domestic calm. In the afternoon, she might visit the temple. Offerings are left not just for the gods, but for appearances. Faith and reputation are deeply entangled, and there are duties still. Perhaps a visit to her mother's house, where a marriage match for a cousin is discussed. Perhaps a discreet meeting with a midwife on behalf of a servant girl. These are not her public responsibilities, but they are hers all the same. As dusk settles, the light in the atrium softens. Candles are lit, bronze lamps are trimmed. The evening meal, the cena, is a formal affair. Reclining couches, multiple courses, guests, conversation guided by structure, politics, philosophy, personal anecdotes, carefully crafted to entertain but not offend. She speaks sparingly, but her words carry weight. When the guests leave and the laughter fades, she walks slowly through the corridors of her home. She pauses near the household shrine, the lararium, and touches the small painted image of her ancestors. Not out of superstition, but habit, continuity. She returns to her chamber. Her attendants unpin her hair. She washes her hands with lavender water. She removes her jewelry. Each piece has a place. She lies in bed, staring briefly at the painted ceiling above. Perhaps it's decorated with scenes of Minerva or a field of painted stars. Outside, the city sleeps or stirs in other quarters. In the insulae, children still cry, fires smolder, arguments flare over rent or spilled grain. But here it is quiet, and yet her life is not free. She is watched, judged. Her reputation is currency. A wrong gesture, a poorly phrased letter, an overly familiar glance at a guest, all can echo beyond the walls. Still, within her silence, there is power. She does not rule Rome, but she shapes the spaces in which its rulers live. And as she closes her eyes, the flicker of a lamp dancing on the far wall, her last thoughts are not of glory or gold, but of balance, of control, of duty. Tomorrow will begin again, with the same slow grace, the same measured gestures, the same unseen labor behind the veil of leisure. And so, our long, quiet walk through ancient Rome comes to an end, not through the marble halls of the Forum, nor the triumphal arches of emperors, but through doorways far more ordinary, more human. We began our journey several stories above the street, in the swaying, overcrowded timber of a Roman insula. There we awoke in darkness, descended narrow stairs, and braced ourselves against the heat, the noise, and the struggle of another ordinary day. Not a day of glory, but of survival. We felt the flames rise, not as legend, but as experience. The great fire of Rome was indeed just a moment of destruction. It was a moment of clarity, a reminder of how fragile a home can be when walls are made of plaster and roofs are made of hope. We watched as Nero reimagined a city, while so many were left to sift through soot. Then we descended into the silence beneath our feet, where archaeologists uncovered the quiet outlines of lives long forgotten, a staircase leading nowhere, a graffitied insult, a comb left behind in haste, each one a soft echo from the past, still waiting to be heard. And finally, we stepped into another world entirely, the carefully controlled domain of a senator's wife. There, the days moved, not with urgency, but with poise, every gesture deliberate, every silence meaningful. Hers was a life of influence, bound not by chains, but by expectations, quieter, but no less heavy. These stories of the poor and the privileged, of collapse and control, remind us that history isn't only written in ink or etched in stone. Much of it is lived, slowly, silently, in small rooms, on worn steps, by hands that never made the statues, but passed by them every day on the way to the mill, the bakery, the bath. And now, as the city dims and the voices quiet, we leave those footsteps behind. The oil lamps gutter, the stairs creak once more, the atrium falls into shadow. Rome sleeps, and perhaps now you will too. Sleep well.